Really excited for everyone to be here tonight. Really excited to dive into eMoney and help everyone understand how to use their profile a little bit better, what tools they have available to them, and at what point does it make sense to kind of reach out to us to get involved and really be double checking everything. And the short answer to that is probably always, just so you know, but we do want to equip you guys with the tools to be able to make updates as you see them. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Let me move all of this right there. Perfect. All right. So first thing, when you get logged into eMoney, you should be able to see the screen that says "Let's get started" here. So if you're a new client, if you've been with us for a while, or you're thinking about joining with us, when you log in eMoney, you might see this if you've never completed it, even if you are a client that's been with us for a while. So we do encourage everyone to go ahead and hit this "Let's get started" button. And what this process does is it takes you through a few questions. It lets you communicate with us. Hey, what's most important to me? As you can see here, what's on my mind. So, these you would select the things that are the most important. Maybe right now we're going to say retirement planning, providing a legacy. I want to contribute to a charity, minimizing taxes, and investment management. And then once you get to the next page, it kind of allows you to reorder these so you can put them in the actual top priority, second, third, fourth. And that way, we're all kind of working on the same sheet of music. We know what's important to you, so we can kind of develop our financial plans around that, making sure we're addressing what's most important first, and then trying to get everything on there. And we will address everything, but we do want to be able to prioritize those things that are most important to you. If you were to continue clicking through here, there's a few more questions about what keeps you up at night. It'll ask you a few family questions in terms of, birth date, salary information. Do you have any kids? Do you have any parents that we need to be including in your financial plan, or any other professionals, attorneys, CPAs, things like that that we want to be included. So I'll stop there and I'll go ahead and go to my homepage. But I do want to encourage everyone, if you haven't done the onboarding yet, to really take the time and do that. All the information that we've already put in your plans, when you log in, you should see that input like the salary, the kids, if we've already been working in your profile. So it really should just be confirming information and making sure we have all the birth dates correct and all of that information. But once you get through with the onboarding, or if you click go to my homepage, you'll end up at the homepage here. I'm going to kind of start at the top here first and show you these are the main categories you have. So you have the home, the organizer, goals, spending, investments, vault reports. We're going to do a quick review of all of these today. We'll go in more detail on some. We'll kind of save some additional details for further workshops if you're interested. First thing I'd like to highlight is you have some of our administrative buttons over here, like our help button. This is a really cool button for whatever page that you're on. So anytime you click the help button, it actually knows which main page you're on, and it gives you related topics that you may be looking for based on that page. Additionally, every page has this take a tour of this page option. And if you were to click that, it actually helps you navigate the page. It's very interactive. Show it to you real quick. So you can see, you can kind of hit through next and it'll guide you through what each thing is, give you a few tips and tricks on how to best utilize that page. You can see on here, there's also a few different cards here, a few different sections in the program. And each one of these sections kind of correlates to one of these main tabs up here. This is more of a summary page more than anything else. When you get to the home, it shows you a little bit of everything that's made up of your eMoney profile. And a lot of these things are actually pretty customizable. So for like this net worth here, for example, if you were to hit the settings button over here, you actually have a few different views that you can look at. So eMoney's template is generally the most basic view, so with the least amount of data. But if you were more interested in seeing the percentages of growth in your net worth, or if you wanted to see your assets, liabilities, cash, debts, you can see there's a few different options on here. Same thing goes for our investments tab. If you want to see more information on your homepage about your top holdings, about your large scale asset allocation, or your top accounts, we can click those to make those a little bit more customizable. Additionally, you'll see throughout eMoney, as you hover over different items, that they'll be hyperlinked. You'll see that little line come up under them. If you click that, it'll actually take you to the corresponding main page so you can see more information on it. Generally speaking, the easiest way is just to navigate using this top bar up here, but just wanted you to know that that's available. Additionally, on this right-hand side here, we have the My Goals section. And if you were to hit the How am I doing today, it'll actually give you a Monte Carlo probability of success score based off your situation, and for all the goals that we've discussed. And we'll get more into goals and how these work once we get to the goals tab. But this does give that quick summary. We also have the spending tab here, and we will spend a good amount of time talking about spending today, how to best use it, how to share information with us, what's the best way to share information. But this is a really important tab that I would encourage everyone to use for a few reasons that I'll get to during that portion of the presentation. And lastly, we have some quick information on your protection. So if you were to hit this view all, you would see all of your life insurance, your property casualty, medical, disability, any kind of insurance that you have currently will be shown here when you hit that view all. And then lastly, on this page, we'll look at the accounts, because this is where we'll probably spend the most of the time clicking buttons on the page. And firstly, I didn't mention this earlier, but we're looking at Timothy and Grace Miller here. You may already be familiar with their account. They are a fictional client, so we're not on here showing actual client information. So this is a made-up account. They don't have any live cash balances, credit cards, or investment accounts, which is why you don't see any credit cards here. When we click on these, you'll notice that none of them are actively linked. And I say that because I do want to talk about linking here in a second. The main difference that you may see when you log in your profile is there may be an attention button here that's showing you your accounts that need attention. If you see that on your account, what that means is that you've either previously tried to create an account, or there was an account that was previously linked, and that information is no longer being shared with eMoney. So we always want to make sure that we repair those or refresh those. And if you need help on that, they should have Connections Account Help. If you click that, it'll give you a little sheet. It'll give you a one-pager on how to refresh those accounts and fix them. But we always want to make sure that's up to date, because that's actually going to control everything in here. All the reports, when you see your net worth, the investments, your cash flow statements, any of the other reports are impacted by the accounts that we link. So that's one of the more important things every time we log in. We want to double check that, make sure all of our links are still good to go. But so like I was saying earlier, if you look at this quick orientation to our accounts tab, you can see we have a few different categories. We have the cash, credit cards, taxable, tax advantage, life insurance, loans, property, and stock options. If you hit any of these drop downs, you'll see all the accounts that make up this total value here. And then under those, you'll see link account if they're not already linked. If they are linked, you won't see this button that says link account, but you will see the last time that that account was refreshed. So you can see that these are getting a little stale. So if we were talking to Tim and Grace here, we would probably ask that they link this account. And I'll just kind of give you a quick tutorial on how to do that. I'm going to assume that Grace's checking here is at Chase Bank. So when we're linking an account, you'll see here we have a search bar that we'll just go ahead and search whatever financial institution that we're looking for. And it is very important that we make sure that the web address that we're locating is the same one that we would normally log into on the computer. So you can see here when I search Chase, JP Morgan, Chase and Company came up. A few other entities came up. We see Chase here, which is the most likely option, but we always want to double check to make sure that it's the correct website. So I'll click that here. And then once you get here, it'll give you some additional information in terms of what you need to do to link the account. So on here, for example, it's telling us that Chase uses API, which is a security feature. That means that eMoney and Chase have an agreement that although you're giving login credentials through eMoney, by no means can eMoney impact any of your information within Chase Bank. What that means is that Chase Bank is just going to basically send them balances on a routine schedule, generally after every business day. So that way they can get updated, but it's not actually, you can't impact anything on Chase from eMoney. So if you were to hit continue, it's kind of telling you here that you're about to re-navigate to the Chase website. Anytime there's an API link, you're going to get re-navigated to a new website. Well, not a new, you're going to get navigated to the host website. You'll log in through there. Once you log in, you'll select the accounts that you want to share with eMoney, and then you'll come back to eMoney. It'll redirect you here. For now, since we don't actually have a Chase account, I'm just going to go back to our main page. And I'll show you. So that is, if you have any accounts that we've already manually created, that's how you can go ahead and link those accounts. If there's an account here that's just completely misrepresented, or not misrepresented, sorry, that's not represented at all, you would just go up here and you can hit this add account button. And once you get here, it's going to work very similar to the last page we're on, except you have one additional question where it says, I have a login, or have an online login to this account, or I don't have an online login to this account. If we choose the I have an online login to this account, it's going to take us through that same process we were just looking at through Chase. So we can search whatever financial institution that we're looking for. So for here, for demonstration purposes, eMoney has kind of created this link for us to click on. And you can see it gives us additional instructions on what we need to do in order to finish linking that account. Here, it's just telling us that this is not a real account. It's all for demonstration purposes. But if I were to hit continue, it just takes me to a place where I can apply my login credentials and connect the account. So we'll go back. If we were adding an account that does not have an online login, we would do the same thing, except we would choose the I don't have an online login. And then we would choose the appropriate type of account. So cash, liability, investment account. And then it'll give you some additional options, and you would just kind of follow the prompts to make sure that we're representing that correctly. And from the homepage standpoint, that's all I really wanted to cover. So I'm going to pause there and ask my host if there's any questions that I'm missing from the group real quick.
As of right now, Dylan, we are good to keep moving.
All right. So I don't see any. Just want to double check. So the next tab is the, excuse me, the next tab is the organizer tab. If you've worked with us before in terms of we've done a screen share, we've gone through kind of a documents and details meeting, you've probably seen or heard us at least reference updating your facts and eMoney. That's on the advisor suite. That's what it's called. On the client portal, it's actually called the organizer. You have the ability to influence a lot of the same information, a lot of the same data. But it's called your organizer, and you can see why. It's where we actually organize all of our information. And this tab is extremely important because this is where everything gets pulled from for every other tab. So our goals tab, our investments tab, our reports tab, all of this is pulled from the information that's found here. And you can see high level, we have a few different, accounts or a few different pages we can navigate to under the main page. We have our family overview. So for here, we have Tim and Grace Miller. We see their birth dates. If we wanted to add a phone number, email address, employment, or if we clicked on their name, it gives us a few additional options, contacts. We can upload documents from here if we've requested any. And then it's very similar for if we go down to people, if we're looking at their kids or their parents. If you see a person or a property is missing, so there's a lake house we haven't talked about yet, a rental property or a new grandkid or something along those lines, you can always come up here and hit the add person, or can hit the add property, and you would just select the appropriate one and go through the prompts to add those, but with all the correct information. As you move, we have the same thing for accounts. This is the only button that I wouldn't really recommend for most people adding accounts here. I would just use the home page. It's the same process, but the organizer has them all consolidated. So you can see on this tab, we have all of the accounts that the Millers have. And then if, like I said before, if there were links that had been severed that are no longer communicating, those would all be consolidated here, but they would also be in your home page. Or if we just wanted to see the manual accounts, we could click here. But generally speaking, for most people, it's a lot easier just to use the home page. You'll have the same result. A few other tabs here. We have our professional contacts. So that's for just like when we were onboarding, this is a separate location in which we can upload, if you have an attorney that you like to work with, a property casualty insurance agent, You have a CPA that we need to be aware of, so we're working with them. This is a great place to put those professional contacts to keep everything organized. This tab, under the professional contacts, we have our income, expenses, and savings tab. This is an important tab. They're all important, but this one has a lot of good information on it. You'll see here that has three main categories. We have our annual income, we have our annual living expenses, and our contributions and savings. If you click on any of these hyperlinks, you'll see that we can actually change any of the data. So we can change the name, we can change who owns it, we can change how much the amount is. You'll see the annual amount before taxes. We always want to make sure that we're putting in the before tax amount because in the system, we're actually already accounting for federal and state tax rates. So we always want to make sure we put our pre-tax amount and then we can put when the salary is going to start. So if we're going to update this to 2024, for example, and then the end year. So when Grace is retired, you can change calendar year, a few different options here. We have a lot of functionality. Same thing goes for living expenses. Right here, you'll see the total living expenses, but I am going to jump ahead a little bit here and say if the Millers had linked their credit cards and had actively linked bank accounts where we could view all of the spending data that we'd find in here, there would actually be an additional button here that says estimate from spending, and it would take your actual real world spending and it would create all of your appropriate categories right here. So we're not necessarily estimating, we have a pretty real example of what we're actually spending. Additionally, if we've already built out a worksheet for you, like if you filled out our cash flow worksheet in eMoney, we've created the line items for each thing. So we have the auto gas or we have the lawn service, entertainment. Those are all going to be separate line items here. So you can actually see what the system is showing you spending. And then lastly, down here, we have our annual contribution and savings. So we can see which account we're saving to. We can see the total value over here. If we want to see additional or change any information, we can click here and we can see exactly what we're changing. So we see that Tim is contributing 6% of his salary towards his 401k. He's receiving a 4.5% match. Let's say that he needs to update that to 8%. He would come in here and change that to 8, and then he would go ahead and hit save. And then that would affect all of the reports, everything else. So we want to make sure that's an accurate change. But so this is an important tab. This is where you come anytime you have a change to income, living expenses, or contributions or savings. And then we also have future expenses on here. So this is for if we have an expense that would not be categorized as a everyday living expense. So an example of this would be, we know we're going to retire a little bit before Medicare is going to kick in, and we need a plan for some additional healthcare savings or some Affordable Care Act expenses, or we know we're going to buy a car in a few years, but it's not here now. This is where you would go and you would input it here. So you could hit the future expenses, you would hit the add expense, and you would go through the prompts of adding whatever that expense is going to be. And then the last two tabs on here, we have our financial priorities. This is the same as when we were onboarding. It's another place where you can influence this if you have a change or need to add or remove anything. It also allows the spouse to come in here and make those changes as well. So this is something that we want to make sure we're taking a look at so that we're all working off the same sheet of music. The last one here is a risk tolerance. I wouldn't necessarily spend too much time in the eMoney system. If you've been working with this, you know that we have our own risk tolerance questionnaire that we use. So we can keep on using that one and not worry too much about that. And I will pause there and see if we have any questions real fast. I don't think I see any, but if I'm missing something, feel free to hop in.
We do. Someone's asking about if they have any plans to launch like an app version of eMoney, or can you only access it on the website?
Yeah, so there is not technically an app, but you can treat it like an app on your phone. I think we can send a handout in the follow-up email, James, to everyone that shows them how to navigate that. Additionally, there is a help button here. It may only be on the home page. 1 second. But long story short, access mobile site. So long story short, what they have the ability to do is if you log in through your phone, you can save the login screen to your home page on your phone, and then it will create a widget that acts like an app. And then once you get logged in, you can you have information to everything that you would in the PC version. But on your phone, it is actually very convenient for if you just want to see the home page, especially. So I do recommend that everyone does that. It does take a few minutes, but the walkthrough that we'll send out makes it very clear how to achieve that. And I'll pause there. James, was there anything else you were saying?
Um, also with the folder section, there's a couple folders that are marked private,
Yep.
and they were wondering if they needed to be granted permission to use those, or what those were for.
So yeah, that's a great question. The private tab, you don't need permission to grant it. That's actually a tab that I won't be able to see. So we'll kind of cover this a little bit more once we get to the vault here. But you'll see here on the advisor side, it knows that I'm viewing as an advisor. You'll actually see there's no file that says private documents. That's only for the client. So that's a place where if the client needs to save something for their spouse, if in case of something were to happen to them and they want to make sure, it's password protected on the cloud somewhere, that's a great place to put it because not even the advisors here at Vita Financial will have access to that document. That's only for the clients, to be able to see. No one else will see that. We only see the other documents here.
And I got one more question that just came in.
Mhm.
In the annual living expense category, is it by month or by year? The value column on there.
That's a great question. So anything in eMoney is almost always going to be annual. So all of those expenses that you would put in here. So if you're on your page, for example, right now looking at annual living expenses, all those numbers should be annual. The only thing that would be monthly that I can think of in the system is going to be your mortgage asked for it monthly, but everything else in the system is going to be annualized. Great question, though. All right. So kind of moving on to our goals tab here. So first thing I'd like to highlight is you have what we call active goals and explore mode goals. So active goals, what those are is these are the goals that we have on the advisor side. These are the ones that we've been planning for. So if you have goals that we've been talking about, for example, the Millers have a goal for retirement, and you can kind of see the basics of their retirement, what they want to do. And they also have Michael, who they want to pay for his college, and we have the information on what that's going to consist of. So that's what goals is showing. It's showing the goals we've already talked about, and it gives you in relation to your Monte Carlo score. And if you're unfamiliar with what a Monte Carlo score is, it's using a lot of statistics based off previous market data, forward-looking market data, standard deviations. It's using a lot of different market data to give you potential results about what we think may happen in the future. So if you actually hovered over the chart like I'm doing now, you would see a below average market and a average market and above average market. That's showing you out of all the scenarios that it ran at the 20% at the 20th percentile mark. So, the worst 20%, what does their portfolio look like? At the average market, 50%, what does their portfolio look like? At the above average, 80%, 80th percentile, what does it look like? To give you kind of a realistic range of what possibilities may happen based off achieving these goals and all their investment assets and all their cash flows. In the Monte Carlo, eMoney runs 1,000 scenarios. So when we're looking at this is all based off those 1,000 scenarios. So you'll see over here, if you scroll down, you'll see their probability of success. You can actually get additional information on viewing the funding details. So for example, here you'll see in the retirement section, you'll see that it's using all assets to attempt to meet that goal, to make sure that the Millers can meet their retirement goal. But if you click down here and see the saving for Michael's college, they actually have a few dollars in other accounts that's kind of earmarked for that expense. If they had an education savings account, like a 529 in here as well, maybe we would be using that. But what we're telling the system here is, hey, we're trying to meet this goal with only this money. If this money isn't sufficient, then I want you to give me the probability of success, I guess, that this money is going to be sufficient to meet that goal. So if maybe we had a 529 in here instead of those accounts, and it was underfunded a little bit, this probability of success may come back less ideal, maybe 75, 70%, something along those lines. But like I said, right now we're in the active goals. These are things that we're actively working towards. You can see the information on here. But if you go to the explore mode, what I want to highlight here is this is different than the active goals, and then this is different than the organizer. Like I mentioned in the organizer, if you make any changes there, it's actually going to make changes throughout the system to all your reports, to everywhere else. The explore mode and the goal section is different. This is kind of your own sandbox that you get to play in. It's not going to affect anything else. So you can come in here and you can kind of use it as a way to gauge if some of your goals or ambitions are realistic. So let's say we came in here and we were getting close to retirement, the Millers are, and they're like, hey, we've been talking about a lake house for 5 years. Is that something that's realistic? They can come up here and they can hit the add goal button, and you can choose whatever category is appropriate, and you'll be able to change the name anyway. So maybe we want to name this major purchase, lake house. We want to buy that when Tim retires. And it's going to cost us $800,000. Make up round number. When we hit save here, the next screen, it's going to ask us about those funding details, which is why I mentioned those earlier. We want to highlight which accounts we're willing to use to pay for this. So you can go down, you can check all of them if you'd be willing to pull money from anywhere. Or maybe we say, hey, we want to use our retirement assets for this because we view this as a retirement home and this is where we want to pull the money from. And if you hit save goals, right now, it's going to initiate eMoney running the 1,000 scenarios all over again. So you can see we have that drop off right here when we purchased the house. You can see it changed our retirement score because we're pulling from the funds that were accessible to retirement, but we can buy the lake house. So maybe if you were interested in something and you weren't talking to us, you and your spouse were talking about it, and you saw that it had a 95% success or 100% success, maybe you'd want to book a meeting with us to maybe discuss what that may look like. Or you can come in here and say, hey, retirement, I want to edit this a little bit. Instead of me retiring at 60, what if I want to retire at 55 and 58? Don't want to change anything else. How does that impact the plan? So I guess long story short in here, when you go in here creating all these goals, this is kind of the place to play around. This is the place where you can explore, you can play with different ideas you have. And at the end, if you don't want to see them and you said, okay, I think I got a good feeling, you can hit reset and it's going to just change it back to the active goals. But nowhere else in the system will this go and change any of your current goals or affect anything else in eMoney. This is the perfect place to kind of explore some of those ideas and get really creative and ambitious with kind of your long-term financial goals. And I'll pause there for any potential questions that we have coming in.
Nothing else right now, Dylan.
All right, great. So we'll go ahead and kind of move on to spending here real quick. All right, so on the spending tab, there's a few things I want to highlight here. The first one being that you can see on here, we don't have permission as advisors. So naturally speaking, I think some people may be concerned with a little bit of privacy. If you had your credit cards linked, that we would see where you're getting gas, we would see everything else, and then maybe you're concerned with that information. Just so you know, we actually don't automatically see anything. You actually have to award us that access if you want us to see it. So I'm going to kind of start there and show you if you wanted to share all or some of the information with us, or your spouse. So I will say the way that eMoney sets it up is they have a primary client that kind of hosts the website. So you see whoever's name is first is who eMoney views as the primary client on this profile. So right now, Tim is the primary client. And if Grace were to log in, she would actually see the same symbol. And eMoney does that because Some people share this account with CPAs, with attorneys, with people who aren't their spouse or, their kids. And so they don't automatically award that right to anyone that's not the primary spouse. But it's extremely easy to change. You go in here and you click settings. You go over, you see these top 3 bars here. You go over to privacy. And then you'll see right here, you see all the different privacy settings. Now, the only reason that you don't see Grace Miller here as well, like I was just mentioning, is because Tim hasn't gone on and set up his account yet. So there's no primary client in this client portal right now. But you can see Steven's on here. He's the advisor of record in eMoney, and you can see his current limited access is none, or his current access is none. You could give him limited or full access. The same with your spouse as well. And here you would have the same options. Full would show them all the spending data. So you would see there's 3 categories. When you hit the spending tab, you have the overview, you have budgets, and you have transactions. The full gives full information on all of those. The limited, though, is where you may want to consider sharing stuff with your advisor or anyone else. What that does is it breaks down the primary categories of each expense. So auto, gas, lawn care, like I was saying earlier, healthcare insurance. So it just gives us the main category and then the total expenditures. So that's one way you may want to consider sharing if you were interested. But on here, like I said, you would generally, if you were logged in yours, you would have the overview that you click in and it just gives you a nice pie graph and shows you where all of your transactions are happening. You would have the budgets, which you can actually create a budget and establish alerts if things go over, if things, aren't, if things go over or if they're short. You can also look at your previous data and you can have it create you a budget. So you can kind of know where you stand and get yourself a good starting point and go from there and say, oh, wow, last month we spent $500 on eating out. Maybe that's a little excessive, but let's start there and, let's see if we do that again and see if that's pretty consistent or if last month was high. It's a really good starting point for those kinds of things. And for the transactions tab, that's where it's actually going to lay out every transaction that you have between all the cards that's linked. You'll see your income coming in your bank accounts. You'll see transfers for paying off your credit cards. You'll see all the credit card spending information, just like you would on a statement, where you spent it, how much it was for, what the category is. And I think that's one of the cooler features about using the spending tab, because if there's anyone out there like me, I have multiple credit cards. I'm a little bit into kind of the credit card hacking, trying to maximize my points. So I have a gas card that gets a certain percentage and a grocery card that gets a certain percentage and something that we use for online shopping that gets a certain percentage, travel card. So for me, I have multiple credit cards I have to pay. And then when I come here in the transactions, I can see all of them at once. So instead of having to pull up the statement on each card and go through each month, I have a place where I have it all consolidated. I can see where everything's at. So when I go in and pay the bills, it's super easy. I've already reviewed everything, make sure everything's good to go. One thing about that is if you have excuse me, if the categories kind of come up wrong, so if you have experience using Mint or you need a budget, personal capital or principal capital, I forget the exact name of it, what you'll notice is most of them come over correct. 85–90% of all the transactions come over correct, but some of them may not. So if that happens, you can actually, it's really easy to go in, you just hit change category. So if if I go shopping at Kroger and buy groceries and it labels it as gas, I can click, change that category to groceries. And then there'll be a button on the bottom that asks, do you want to change this permanently? Meaning that every time an expense comes across as that, it'll change it to the appropriate category. And that way in the future, it keeps on getting better and better. So if you have a lot of frequent purchases every month or consistent purchases every month, after the first few months, you'll probably have them all categorized correctly and it'll get more and more correct. And then you'll just have one-offs every once in a while when you're traveling somewhere new or having an expense you haven't had before that you may need to update. But the spending data, we do want to have a future workshop in there. We're trying to work with our back office and see if we can get some spending data created in here so we can give some examples. But this is a really cool tab, helps with a lot of things. I really encourage everyone to link their credit cards, their bank accounts to make sure they're using this tab appropriately. And I'll pause there. I don't see any questions, but I will give a second for the host to chime in or the other host to, if there is anything. Okay.
No, not right now.
All right, great. So we've kind of moved to our investments tab here. What this has is this shows all of our different investment accounts. You'll see we have a few different choices up here, what to look at. We'll kind of go through these one by one. So we'll start in our summary page. We have our accounts, so we can hit this drop down and we can navigate to any individual account. By default, each page puts us at all investments. So, the value we're seeing here, the balance history on this chart we're seeing here is all the investments. If we want to look at a specific investment, we could either hit this drop down or we could come over here and hit the actual hyperlink to there. And this will provide us with more information. I know I've been asked a few times about, some of this information. So if you click on it, you'll actually see the symbol. So you'll see, your ticker symbol, you'll see the description, you'll see the quantity you own, the price per share, what the total value of that holding actually is. If this were a taxable investment, it would also have a separate category for your cost basis. So you generally have all the information that a lot of people are looking for. And then you'd see on here that as the graph, you can see the graph go year by year, however long the account has been opened. So that's a great place to check those accounts. And it's another important reason why we always want to make sure those accounts are linked, like I talked about in the beginning, because this pulls balances at the end of every month. So if your account goes unlinked for 3 months, that's kind of when you see maybe something like this where it's flat and then maybe it jumps up really quick and then it's flat because we're relinking accounts. Maybe it was a flat market, but it could be caused by those accounts not being linked. It kind of not necessarily corrupts the data, but it doesn't give us accurate long-term data, which is a big reason why I want to make everything accurate and current as possible. But that's the summary page. If we go to allocation, I'm really interested in this stuff. Maybe others are not, but you can actually see what you're invested in from a big asset class. So we can see here that in international, for all of their assets combined, here's how many dollars they have in it currently. Here's the percent of the category, which is right here, the equities category, percent of overall portfolio. You can see that goes down. It has the tax exempt, taxable bonds, other investments, cash, equities. And if you're interested in seeing on what those holdings look like, for example, international, if you clicked on that, you could get a consolidated list of all the current international holdings. So if we go back to the main page, if we wanted to look at an individual account, we hit this drop down and say, let's say Grace was on here and she was interested in her 403B allocation. She could come on here and she could see how she's allocated, what percent does it make up of her portfolio, what holdings does she have that fits that criteria, et cetera here. So if you're interested in kind of what you're invested in from a big picture asset allocation, this is a great place to review that. This next tab is, I think, a little bit confusing in its display. So the first thing I want to say on this analysis tab is that this is not a performance review or a performance analysis section. And I say that because it looks a lot like it would be when it has, these up arrows and down arrows, and it's 9.2% up and or 17.8% up or 2.7% up or 2.8% down. That looks a whole lot like a performance review. That's not necessarily the case. This is actually just a balance tracker. So if you have an account like a 401k, people very commonly are actively contributing to every month, and maybe they're getting employer contributions as well. So it's just tracking the balance. So it's not giving you a performance. It's not, if that account was up 15%, some of that may be developed or made up of contributions and employer contributions versus just performance growth. So I do want to highlight that this is just balances, not performance related. You'll see on this graph up here, if you wanted to have a graphical representation of an account, just to kind of see the long-term trend, you control that by turning on and off these labels here. So if you just wanted to look at Timothy's 401k, you turn it on. If you want to compare it to the IRA, you could turn that on and see the performance. You see you have a few different options up here for time periods, 3 months, 6 months, lifetime. You can kind of use this to look at any information you want regarding balances and accounts. Our last one is very similar to our spending transactions, where if you were to come in here, you would be able to see all of the spend or all the transactional data for any account you wanted. If you wanted to look at all of them, like I previously said, Tim and Grace Miller are fictional clients, so they don't actually have any transactional data. But if you had linked accounts, those would be in here. And you can change the dates. I mean, you have a lot of autonomy here in terms of what months, what years you want to see, all time, custom ranges. You can see any time period that you would like. And then for all the different transaction types in here, you would see, this is all the different transaction types that will populate in here. So the adding of cash, shares, buys, sells, closing positions, income, investment expenses, reinvestments. So it's a pretty comprehensive list of everything that you would see normally if you logged into Wellscape and looked at a brokerage statement, transactional statement, everything, all of those things are also going to be right here as well. So you'll be able to see all the different transaction types of your portfolio. And I'll pause there for a second. I don't see any questions, so I'll keep on rolling here in a few seconds if unless some of the other hosts are
I
seeing
got
something.
two questions that rolled in, Dylan. They're both kind of related to the same thing. How often should somebody update their information, like their data and facts in there? And then if they do, does it notify us that they've changed something, or do we have to look manually?
Yeah.
How do we know?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So in terms of updating anything, I would say it's almost kind of whenever something changes is the optimal time. Worst case is you always want to make sure things are updated before we kind of head into a financial review. So that's kind of the minimum that you would want to update it. Best case scenario though is, you get a raise at work, we would come in here and we'd make an update. You open up a new investment account because you're receiving some stock options from work, you come in here and update. So that would be the best case. And then, yes, when people come in here and make updates, us as the advisors, we do get alerts. So we see those. So it's likely that you'll get reached out to either by one of the advisors, myself, or some of our administrative staff. So Kaylee or Vic, if you haven't been introduced to them, they may shoot you an email, making sure, seeing if we want to book an appointment to review the changes, make sure everything is 100% correct. But that was a great question. Thank you for asking.
Got kind of a follow-up on that one too.
Mhm.
Do they have to make those changes themselves, or can they notify us to make them, or
Yeah.
like a walkthrough sort of deal?
No, yeah, so they don't have to make those changes. Anytime they want to make an appointment with us, I'm always available. I'm helping a lot with the eMoney stuff here. So people can always book an appointment with me, or if they want to get, Stephen or Arthur or Drew, or whoever they want to talk to on the phone, we can always help. And we actually most of the time encourage people that we make any kind of complicated updates. If it's something simple like you got a raise in your salary and it went from 60,000 to 65 or 70,000, that people can go in there and update those, but we're more than willing to make any of the updates. We always like to review updates that clients do make, especially if there's multiple of them, to make sure that we have a clear picture and clear understanding of everything and make sure nothing's missed. For example, if maybe someone were to switch jobs, maybe we haven't talked to them in a month and a half, they got a new job offer, they went ahead and they made the job. They came in and updated their salary, which is great. That's fantastic. It's very proactive. But there may be a deeper conversation there around, okay, well, what are your new employee benefits? What's your new employer contribution? Let's help you get all that updated. So people can update. We encourage everyone to update anything they feel comfortable to, but we do love to review those changes. And if people would just know that they need to get a refresh or get an update, we always encourage people to make an appointment. And my calendar will be available following this meeting as well. All right, great. I'll go
They
ahead
said
and,
thank you to them.
all right. Well, thank you. Great question. So the next one is the vault. I think a lot of us are probably already pretty familiar with the vault. But if not, it works a lot like any kind of other file sharing or data storage system. So if you have File Explorer, or Finder on Mac, it works very similar to that in concept, meaning that you have folders. Inside the folders, you have the different files. If you were to go up here You can see you can upload different things. You can upload files, folders. You can create new folders. You can just drag and drop documents. So if you have a PDF, I had something on my other screen here, I could just drag and drop that in here and it would populate. So it's very intuitive to use, but it is extremely important. One thing is we really discourage sharing any kind of personal information via email. So like your W-2s, those tax returns, a new pay stub, your benefits elections, all those things can have personal information on it. Anytime it has personal information of things that we need to review, we always want you to put it right here in that shared documents folder. That way it keeps everything safe. It keeps everything behind, password protected. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but eMoney is a subsidiary of Fidelity, who's the third largest money manager in the world and has a very robust security network and security systems. So you can think eMoney kind of falls under that umbrella. It's a much safer place to share information than through email. So we always want to encourage people to use this. And you may have already seen this, but if we're kind of giving anyone financial planning documents that we need them to see, if we're giving them insurance quotes, we will always actually pass those through the file as well. And I mentioned it earlier, but also don't forget that there on your version, there would be that private documents folder. So if you had things that maybe weren't necessarily for us to see, but you did want them on an encrypted, secure cloud somewhere for you and your spouse, that would be a great place to store those items. And I'll pause there, and if not, we'll move on to our report section here in just a second. All right, great. So this last tab here, this is another section similar to how the spending tab that we're going to want to have future workshops on, because it is a very robust section, and I want to make sure that we're giving it the attention it deserves. But if you've ever seen us in meetings talking, showing you reports, talking through things with you, showing you all these fancy numbers, you actually have access to almost all the reports we do. There's a few that I know aren't on here. And we don't have the ability to put them on here yet, but you can see this list of different reports you have is pretty extensive. So you have your balance sheet, you have your favorites here, and then you have all these other cool reports: education planning, estate calculations, expense planning, facts, summaries, flow charts, all that cool stuff that you can click on any of these reports to see them. Those are all pulling information, like we said, through the organizer and then the facts on the advisor side of the house. So that's why it's so important to have all those updated, have all your accounts linked so that this information is always accurate when you log into it. But for example, on here, you can see your balance sheet, you can see all of your assets, you can see who owns each asset, or at least how in eMoney, how we have it input. So you can double check to make sure things are accurately represented. You can see your liabilities. You can see the total net worth for the Millers here. Just to show you a quick example of how easy it is to kind of change reports, you hit this drop down. A lot of us are probably familiar with the cash flow report. So you can come in here and you can see your cash flow. It has all the graphs that you might be familiar with. Shows you line by line, year by year, all the incomes, distributions, total expenses, planned savings, all the stuff you may be interested in. And just like everywhere else in the system, anytime you see a little hyperlink here, it highlights and underlines, you can actually click in there and get some additional information on how that number is being generated. But this is a really robust section that we're going to have future workshops on, some of how to use it, what our favorite reports are, maybe some things that you would want to look at if you're interested in finding different information. But I'll go ahead and pause there for a second. And if not, we'll kind of wrap up by looking at our little task list here. All right.
How frequently are home values refreshed in eMoney?
Did you specifically just ask home values? Was that what I heard, James?
Yes. How frequently are home values refreshed in eMoney?
So home values are only refreshed as often as we refresh them. By that, I mean either the advisor or the client through the organizer tab can refresh those values. We have a button and on our side of the house that we can actually use the Zestimate to kind of refresh it. But if you have a more accurate assumption, some people, it doesn't account for all of their information. Like if your house is on a lake, it's using quotes from a house a mile away. Maybe it's not as relevant. But for home values specifically, the system will not automatically update those. We have to go in and update those manually. And that's a great question and a point I'll kind of go back to here on the home page. If you were to hit the property dropdown, it's the only dropdown where there's no link accounts. So the system doesn't have a way to automatically update those without manual input. And that's the property tab. So anything under this category is not going to automatically update. It's always going to have to be manually. Everything else can be automated depending on the type of account it is. All right, great. So kind of our last tab here, not really a tab, it's a task button. This is something we haven't been using as much, but we're beginning to use a lot more. So we feel like it helps the communication between everyone. Once we make recommendations or maybe we need something from you, you'll likely start to see that populate here. So you'll see for Tim and Grace Miller, they have 2 outstanding tasks. So they have one that's overdue and one that's not necessarily due until June 15th. It's kind of our target date. But we told Tim that he should increase his 401k contributions to 9%, and he hasn't done that. Or when he does do that, what he can do is he can come and actually hit this complete button, and you'll see that that number goes down to 1, and then he only has 1 left. If he wants to see all the tasks he's already completed, for example, he purchased an umbrella insurance policy already, and he just increased his 401k contributions. There's always a running list of all the things that we've done together. So this is something that you'll see that we'll be using more often in the future. If you're a newer client or just getting a plan, you'll actually be using these. And it's a way that we can all easily communicate together, and it's a really cool feature. So we'll just reopen that one, close that. And then lastly, just want to go over kind of some of this admin stuff here with our help button. Again, the help button is a great place to start if you're looking in here and you want to know, and you have a certain question about that page or how to use that page. It may be a popular question, and there may be some kind of how-to here. So you can see here, if I just hit this, it's going to walk me through favoriting different things and how to do certain tasks. But same thing, if you just want an overall tour of the page, they always have, every page has this take a tour of this page, and it'll teach you how to navigate it appropriately. In our settings up here, we've already talked about the privacy settings, how to use that for the spending information. On here as well, you can actually set up a lot of different alerts that you would get. So this would be email alerts. If Tim and Grace had an actual email set up, they had already logged in. When they hit this drop down, they would see all their emails available to them. If they have, some people put their work email in here, their personal, their spouses. So if they had 3 emails, we could come in here and check which ones we want to receive email alerts. And then we could come in here and we can turn on all the different alerts that we wanted to see. So if we wanted to see large deposits, we would turn this on and we would say, maybe for us, a large deposit is anything over $10,000. So anytime that happens, we'll get an email from eMoney telling us that we have some kind of alert. Or maybe we want to see anytime our portfolios are unbalanced, we have a concentrated position, we just received a large stock option to remind us that we need to have a conversation about diversifying. We have tasks assigned to us, we want that alerted. There's plenty of different options here, and a good communication system to make sure you're kind of always getting aware of the changes happening on your profile and make sure we're keeping those updated. And then lastly, but not least, we have our security tab, which is where we go if we needed to update passwords, change phone numbers, update security questions, any things of those sorts. But I'm going to kind of pause there. For the most part, that concludes the eMoney demonstration. I'll see if we have any last minute questions rolling in. If we don't, I really appreciate everyone's time tonight and hope they got some value out of this, whether they've been a client for a while or just becoming a new client. And if you ever have any questions for eMoney, if you ever need help, we're always readily available. You can always get on our calendar within a few days. If not, just give us a call that same day, and we'll always try to help you the best we can and make sure all this is updated and so you can get the best financial recommendations possible for your situation. And I will pause there, see if we have any last minute questions flowing in, but if not, I will pass it back to James or Matt